Once again, we're still in that, some of my favorite sections of the Torah, in learning about Jacob and having to continually reassess and relearn what comes so automatically and how I've always been taught about him. And of course, there's always more to see. At the beginning of this Torah portion in Genesis 32, Jacob, we've already read about this a little bit, he's afraid. He's afraid at the prospect of meeting his brother Esau. And remember, he left some 20 years earlier just to get away from Esau because Esau wanted to kill him. Esau was so angry, so upset about all of that situation with the blessing and the meal and all of that. He couldn't wait for his father to die so he could kill his brother Jacob. And Esau was a dangerous man. He was a hunter, a killer of people. He was very good at it. He was much more like Nimrod with his type of fighting, that ruling, that tyrant spirit that he had. And in this Torah portion, we learn, he was a fighting man who had amassed a fighting force to accompany him, 400 men. In Genesis chapter 32, verse 7, it says that the messengers that Jacob had sent to him, the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We went to your brother, to Esau, and he's also coming out to meet you." Basically, when he heard you were coming, he geared up. He gathered all of his forces. He's coming out to meet you, and 400 men with him. And when you look at the Aramaic, the Targums of things, it gives us a little bit more of an insight into what kind of men he's bringing with him. It says, "The messengers returned to Jacob, we came to thy brother to Esau, and he also cometh to meet thee, and 400, not just ordinary men, but chief warriors with him, some of his best fighting men he is bringing with him." So when Jacob hears about that, all those fears that he had that had been kind of lingering in the background of his mind of, I don't want to go home yet, all of that came back. He assumed that obviously his brother's intentions have not changed. And his brother is coming to kill him. At this time, it wouldn't be just him that gets killed. He's going to lose everything. He's going to lose everything that God has given him. He's going to lose his family, his wives, his children. They'd all be killed. And despite the fact that he had just seen and camped alongside the angels of God, he was afraid. You remember, that's how this started out. When Jacob left on his way, the angels of God met him. And then Jacob said when he saw them, "This is God's camp." And he named that place Mahanaim. Right, this is God's camp. The angels of God were there, nearby. But despite all of that, he was rightfully concerned about his safety and the safety of his family. Because what if those angels of God that were there to meet him, what if they weren't here to defend him and his family? They may be here doing something else. And Esau was coming against him armed, ready for battle, with questionable intentions and motives. And in a lot of ways, when you look at what's going on today, that's a very similar situation to what's happening now to the descendants of Jacob. The kind of things that they are facing in this day, and they're going to continue to face in the future, because it's not just Esau anymore that is coming against them. It's the world is very much armed. The world is very much amassing their forces, and many of them are moving toward the descendants of Jacob. You know how many nations there are, when you watch the news, are positioning their troops and their forces and getting them a whole lot closer to Israel? Should they be concerned? Do they know all of their intentions? No, they don't know what their intentions are. It's hard to tell from governments and what they're what they say versus what they do, right? And you can have a transition from one government to another, kind of like what we're going through, and we seem to think that, well, hopefully it sure looks like it's going to get better on that front. I'd like to think so. But it's hard to tell what their intentions are. And it's even hard to tell even with the body of Christ, the body of Messiah. You know, nations are divided over the Jewish people, and churches, denominations are divided over the Jewish people. And if you've been paying attention in the last year, that's been revealed in the hearts of many. You know, how many denominations or spiritual leaders have come out and said things, various things, condemning Israel and supporting the Palestinians or various other things. I mean, it's coming out, and it's dividing the people of God. You know, when you look at some of the basic numbers, it says anti-Semitic incidents have increased 360% since last October. And you're talking assaults, vandalism, harassment, threats, friendships, cordiality, you know, all that kind of stuff in some circles has been tossed out, and many things have been revealed. The hearts of many have been revealed. Old theologies and hostilities are making comebacks. What are their intentions when it comes to Israel? Are they really coming with aid? Are they really coming to help? Or are they coming with to undermine and attack and make it more difficult? You know, and the enemy has been coming against even us. You know, making things difficult for us, health-wise, job-wise, all other types of things that we've had the enemy come against and try to make life more difficult. People not, you know, they find out what we are, what we do, and they take a look around and say, I don't know if that's what I want to be a part of. That's happened here. In many ways, the descendants of Jacob and those that are aligning with them feel like they are on their own. You look at what Jacob was going through. Verse 8, he says, Jacob became extremely afraid at hearing that report about Esau coming with these 400 men. He became extremely afraid and distressed, and so he divided the people with him, along with the flocks and the herds and the camels, into his own 2 camps. For he thought, if Esau comes to one, if he comes to one camp and attacks that one, if he strikes that one, then the camp that's left will have the opportunity to escape. Maybe they can get away. He feared his brother, just like many Jewish people, even the nation of Israel, fear the nations. And even those who are supposed to be their close relatives, their close brothers, their close friends, they're not quite sure how they're going to respond to things. Are not those who claim to be followers of Messiah supposed to be citizens of the Commonwealth of Israel and members of God's household? Right? Isn't that what we read about every week? Isn't that what we're supposed to be? Now, I didn't necessarily understand what that meant a few years ago. Did you? It didn't mean as much to me 5-10 years ago as it does now. But we are supposed to be members of God's household with them, essentially their siblings. And yet far too many have taken on the spirit of Esau and wished harm upon Jacob. And Jacob, he has to take precautions. Otherwise, all of his family could be killed. I mean, that whole never again spirit is started all the way back here. That's not something new. And so when we look at what's happening out there in the world and watching the news, Israel today has got to continue to take those kind of precautions in the face of the unknown and uncertain aggressors. Many nations are moving their weapons, moving their troops around, their fighting men, coming in Israel's direction. How should they respond? Who should they trust? And ultimately, if you've paid attention to prophecy over the years, how much of the world turns against them eventually? Pretty much the whole world, doesn't it? All those powers turns against them, and they are not able to depend upon Egypt. They're not able to depend upon Babylon. They're not really even able to depend upon who? The United States. That includes us on some level. And just like Jacob, Israel today has to look to their walk, their relationship with Adonai for guidance and for protection. And just like what happened with Jacob, as the things that happened to Jacob are prophecy or future mirroring in his descendants, they have to turn to him. And we are seeing a growing turn to God among his people in the land, particularly even those who are the soldiers that are turning to him. That's increasing among them, but they are going, just like Jacob, to the right place. We read these verses earlier. Then Jacob said, he's afraid. He's got all of this right in front of him. He's got the enemy right in front of him. He doesn't know exactly what to do, but he goes to God. He says, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Adonai, who said to me, return to your land and to your relatives, and I will do good with you. What's interesting about this statement, in going to the right place, he's still talking of God in terms of his father and his grandfather. Did you catch that? He didn't say, my God. He's that whole relationship, it's like it's as if it's not quite sure yet. He said, remember back at when he first left, he said, God, if you do all these things and you fulfill all your promises and you bring me back to this land, then you will be my God. Then you will be my God. He's not saying that's established yet. He's still afraid, but he's going to him. But he is remembering those promises, things that God said to him while at Bethel. He says, I am unworthy of all the proofs of mercy and of all the dependability that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed over this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. I am unworthy of all these things that you've done for me. That's a good place to start. Not just for Jacob, not just for his descendants, but that's good for us too, by the way. To recognize that we don't deserve the things that he has done. That we should be able to look back on our life at all those different places, all those different times that he has interceded, that he has worked on our behalf, and realize he didn't have to do that, but he did. That word there for I am unworthy is katon. It's the three letters, kaf, tet, and nun. It means to be small, insignificant. I'm not important enough for you to even notice me, is what this is getting across. It's the first time it's used. We are not worthy of all of the proofs of mercy. The word there in Hebrew is chesed. Y'all have heard that one before, right? Chesed, which means loving kindness, goodness, faithfulness. It's a word that we would sing on Yom Kippur when we were singing and repeating that Avinu Melkenu song. Y'all remember that one? I'm not going to try to sing it for you because I'm sure I'd get it wrong at the moment. But we would sing that Avinu Melkenu and sing that one over and over again. Remember that one? It ends talking about his faithfulness. So we're not worthy of his chesed, his proofs of mercy, or of all the dependability that he showed. That's the word emet, which means what? Emet means truth, firmness, sureness, reliability. We're not worthy of His grace or His truth, all those side things, the loving kindness. And he's remembering, it's like, when I started this journey, I didn't have anything. I didn't even have time to really pack. I had only my staff with me. I took nothing with me. And so everything that he has, that's like one of the blessings that we were saying at the beginning of the service. Everything that we have is from him. Everything he has was given to him by God during all those 20 years that he was outside of the land. All the treasure that he is returning with, he gained while he was out there. Just like, the Israelites often did when they were out of the land. You saw that happen when they were down in Egypt or when they were in exile in Babylon. They often came back with the wealth of the nations. And there's even that promise of future wealth of the nations coming to them. And so he says, I'm unworthy of all the proofs of mercy and dependability that you have shown to your servant. Then he calls out to him, deliver me, please, from my brother's hand. Deliver me from this situation, from this enemy, from this sickness, from this challenge, from this obstacle, from this whatever it is that I am dealing with. Deliver me, please, from the things that make me afraid. From my brother's hand, from Esau's hand, for I am afraid of him, that he will come and strike me, the mothers with the children. Deliver me is rescue me. It's natsal. It's the same word that's used in Exodus chapter 3, verse 8, where God says, I have come down to natsal, to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians. That's the kind of deliverance that he's praying for and calling out for. And that word calling out to God is this one. It's na. It means to pray or to beseech, and it's this imperative. It's just this desperation of something that's going to happen in the future. I don't have it yet, but I'm praying that whatever that thing is will happen. And when you look at those letters, the nun is talking about activity and its abundance. And then that second letter, aleph, means what? Often references strength. So when you're praying, you are asking for an abundance of God's strength. His power to be active, to be at work for our need. And for Jacob, that need was the threat of his brother. And he needed God's abundant strength to overcome him. And so then he reminds God of the promises that he made. And that's okay to remind him. It's not like God has forgotten, but remember that you remember. You yourself said, I will most certainly do good with you, and will make your seed like the sand of the sea that cannot be counted because of its abundance. And so he stayed overnight there. He knows that his life and the life of his family, his wives and kids is likely over unless God intercedes. And if God doesn't intercede, then that would make God a breaker of his promises, and he's not going to let that happen. And so when Jacob woke up, he was moved, he was motivated, he sent an offering of peace to his brother out of all that God had blessed him with. It says, then from all that had come into his possession, he took an offering for Esau, his brother. And how many times have you seen Israel do that, make an offering of peace to those that are coming against them? Happens all the time. Right? He says 200 female goats, 220 billy goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels with their young, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. He says he put them in the hands of his servants, each herd by itself, and he said to his servants, pass over before me and put a gap between each, of the herd. So he's clearly not wanting to provoke or start a fight with Esau. He's not coming to try to take anything from Esau, which is so often what would happen when groups are moving into an area. They first want to try to take out the one that's already there and take everything that they have. He's not trying to take from Esau. He's also not trying to conceal anything from him. It's like, look, I've got all of this. The Targums let us know again that the first group of messengers that Jacob sent to tell Esau, he was already letting Esau know that nothing that he has can be counted as belonging to Isaac. This was an interesting little phrase in the Aramaic. It says, of all that in which my father blessed me, there is nothing in my hand. Remember, he's already said, I didn't take anything with me but my staff. Now, why would he say something like that to Esau? What does Jacob think that he's cheated him out of? Or what does Esau think he's been cheated out of? You took with you some of the promise, some of the inheritance, some of the blessings of my father. You've taken that with you, and if I'm coming to you, I'm going to take it back. But he's telling him, all that I have is nothing of that. I didn't go with anything. So you have no claim on any of the stuff that I'm coming back with. But this is just a peace offering. I'm not giving this to you because I owe you anything. I'm giving this to you as a peace offering. In verse 21, he tells the servants, you are to say, look, your servant Jacob is also behind us. And this is his motive. He's saying, for Jacob thought, let me appease him with the offering that goes ahead of me, and afterward see his face. Perhaps he'll lift up my face. And so the offering passed over ahead of him while he spent that night in the camp. And so with each group of animals, Jacob is hoping, whatever anger he may be coming on with, he's hoping that it will appease it. But it struck me this week, it's also just good strategy. If that didn't work very well as far as appeasing his anger, Esau has 400 men with him, right? With each group of animals, he's putting a break in between them, right? With each group of animals that are given to Esau, what would he have to do to receive it? Wouldn't he have to say, okay, Jacob's servants come up here, take these? And then Esau would have said, what am I going to do with all these things? I'll have to divert some of my fighting men. Every time one of these herds shows up, I'm going to have to divert some of them to start taking care of those animals. You following me? Is that smart? Right? How many men do you think it took that he would have to divert to take care of 200 female goats and 20 male goats? Then 200 ewes and 20 rams. If he puts off 10 or 15 the first time, he's putting 10 or 15 off the second time. 30 milking camels and their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 every time his fighting force is getting a little bit smaller. That's just smart, if you ask me. Because they're going to be tied up something else and maybe not as able and ready to fight. Yes, he's hoping to dampen his anger. He's hoping to distract his men. Jacob is planning several steps ahead while he's still praying and while he's still hoping and trusting that, waiting for God to deliver him. Those things are okay to do at the same time, by the way. But in trusting in God, in hoping to see what God does, to help with all of that, to build his strength, to lessen his own fear, he needed some time alone. He needed some time alone with God. And so his family, he takes them across the river and he stays back by himself. still afraid in many respects. He's maybe not ready to face his brother yet. Whatever it is, he's alone. It says Jacob remained all by himself. And then one of the more unusual moments in the scriptures happens. A man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. And it's always been kind of a confusing moment because it's clearly somebody it's a physical being, right, that he's dealing with here. He is grabbing on and holding on to a tangible person. So it's not just a spirit or an apparition or anything like that. You can tell when you read the Aramaic, when you read the Targums, they aren't sure what to make of this either. Because their whole thing is about protecting, the transcendence of God. And who is this that he's dealing with? Well, they try to figure it out, and they don't call him in this instance. They don't call him the Memra or the Word like we've seen elsewhere. Instead, they call this being, an angel in the likeness of a man. And even though, later on in the account, this when Jacob asks him his name and the man refuses to tell him his name, y'all remember that? That's what's coming. Strangely enough, the Targums say that his name is Michael. It's Michael the archangel or whatever else. So even though he refused to speak his name, somehow they found that out. But when he comes to him and says, "Why do you ask me my name?" and he doesn't share him and doesn't tell him, it's as if to say to Jacob, you know exactly who you're dealing with. You know exactly who I am. You've been praying to me all day about your brother. I am the God of your fathers, Abraham and Isaac. He remained there by himself, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. And when he saw that he had not overcome him, he struck the socket of his hip. So he dislocated the socket of Jacob's hip when he wrestled with him. Of course, this is another just confusing statement in its own right. How can Jacob wrestle with the I am, and the I am not overcome or defeat Jacob? I mean, we've already looked at this account, and we know that Jacob is strong, but really? When you look at that word for wrestle, it's really the only time that this word is used. It's a primitive root, probably talking about, floating away as a vapor. And of course, that's one of the first translations is talking about how they get from floating away to grappling and wrestling. I'm not sure. But it also means to get dusty, like you're kicking up a cloud of dust. And they're right on the riverbank, right? They're resting on a riverbank, and what's there along the riverbank a lot of times? It's a lot of sand and a lot of dust, and it's a dry area. So yeah, there's probably a lot of dust that they could be kicking up. But what if it's not wrestling like we think of wrestling? What if there's a lot of grasping and a lot of jumping around and holding on to one another? Not so much like a fight, but like a homecoming. Do y'all have volume for this? What if it's more like that? Two that have been apart for a long time, and they're finally home, getting to see each other again. I'll have to work hard not to cry during all this, so I warn you. Y'all been seeing any of these?
But tonight we have a very special presentation just for him. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome 116 graduate and current U.S. Army infantry.
This is the moment they've both been dreaming of, but it wasn't complete without one more stop.
Hey kids, I want to wish you an early happy birthday from Monrovia. I wish I could be there with you to celebrate, but I can't.
Let's head to center court. We got some birthday gifts that Robbie wants to pass off. Are you ready?
So that's been a hard one to put together in there. What if this moment is more like that? You know, when it's love and joy and welcoming home, and it's not some adversarial test of strength, but that it is a lot of grappling and not wanting to let go of those moments, a lot of jumping around in celebration. You'd be kicking up a lot of dust on a riverbed, wouldn't you? What if it's like a combination of a couple of moments like we read in the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, where Peter is on the Mount Transfiguration and he sees, the vision of Yeshua and Elijah and Moses, and he says, let's it's good for us to be here. Let's build these 3 tabernacles so we can stay. He doesn't want to leave and let this moment end. And you think of what happened with Mary or Miriam's moment in John's gospel after the resurrection, when she realizes that she's not talking just to the gardener. And she cries out and grabs on, and Yeshua has to say to her, "Stop clinging to me, for I have not yet gone up or ascended to the Father." Oh, that we would have so much joy in coming home when we encounter our Creator, when we encounter our Savior. If only we would hold on so tightly to Him and not want to let go and desire so much to be in His presence. When Yeshua talks about even not hindering the little ones from coming to Him, I picture that like the kids that are coming up here for the blessing, rushing up here to be the first ones. When did we grow up so much that we lost that? That we are not so eager to do the same? Why did we grow up so much that we don't feel the same? See, Jacob, in this moment, he is finally having his moment with God. He wanted that blessing. He not his father's blessing or his grandfather's blessing, not the blessing of the birthright or the blessing that his father intended for somebody else. He wanted that blessing that was his, and he wasn't going to let go until he got it. The man said, "Let me go, for the dawn has broken." But he says, "I won't let you go unless you bless me." It's not just about the God of Abraham and Isaac in this moment. It's becoming his. Then he said to him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he said. Then he said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but rather Israel, for you've struggled with God and with men, and you've overcome." This is such a great moment. What is your name? Yaakov, the heel grabber, synonymous with, thanks to Esau's opinion, as you've heard me say before, with supplanter, with cheating, with stealing, essentially becoming a slur against him, against his character. And it's used that way against the Jewish people ever since, that they're all like that. If you don't necessarily relate to that, imagine being a kid in the Revolutionary War era and your parents, out of love, lovingly named you Benedict. But by the time the Revolutionary War was over and you were an adult, that name had become synonymous with what? With being a traitor. Right? You'd want to go by a different name. Hardly anybody gets named Benedict anymore for that reason. And yet Jacob it must mean something better than what we think it does, because is Jacob still a popular Jewish name? Always has been. So maybe it doesn't mean what we think it means. And Jacob, he gets this new name, he gets Israel, and we assign the meaning of that name even in ways that don't always improve the situation. We base it on how we interpret this encounter with Adonai, or with, as I believe this is Messiah here in this moment, that he wrestled or struggled with God. That's how we interpret the meaning of Israel, as if he and God were adversaries and God was fighting against him and Jacob were fighting against God or resisting God, when in reality, throughout this whole sequence of Jacob's life with Esau, with Laban, with whoever it is, God is not fighting against Jacob. He was fighting for Jacob. He was fulfilling the promise that had been made all the way back in 28. I am with you. I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, for I will not forsake you until I have done what I promised you. Adonai has fought for Jacob. And Jacob, he has struggled. He has fought, but it's been against Laban. It's been with God on his side. And there's even got to be more to this meaning of Israel. Struggles with God doesn't really follow God's pattern of naming. We've talked about this recently. When God changes somebody's name, he elevates them from where they are. He increases them from where they are. He renamed Abram, which was exalted father, to Abraham, which means what? Y'all remember? Father of many, and even father of many nations. He renamed Sarai from my princess to Sarah, which means princess of Adonai. Or the Blue Letter Bible will talk about it as a noble woman. He lifts up when he changes somebody's name. And that's what we see in the New Testament, a couple of places. Humble yourselves in the sight of Adonai. This is James 4. And he shall lift you up. 1 Peter says the same. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, so that he may lift you up at the appropriate time. This is the moment for Jacob when he is humbling himself before God. He said, I'm not worthy of all the good things that you have done. And God is lifting him up. When you look at the word Israel and you break it down, it's another example of, I think, of translators thinking they know the story and the character of Jacob better than the word itself, and it affecting even translation. Because when you look at the word Yisrael, El is obviously there on the end, of God, but the first translation option of it is that God prevails. That's very different from struggles with God. It comes from a word which is very similar to Sarah, right, which means to contend, yes, but also have power and persevere. That's where she gets her name, a noblewoman or princess. The masculine form of that is Sar, which means prince. Sar is in the middle of that word. And most, if not all, of the modern translations will stick with that thing about struggles with God. Right? We looked at this one. Your name will no longer be Jacob, but rather Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and you have overcome. But this is one of those examples where the King James actually does it better than just about everything else. He says, what is thy name? And he said to him, Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. That's quite different, isn't it? As a prince, as a chief, as a ruler, as a captain. Yisrael could be translated as Prince of God. You will have power with God to prevail over other men, men like Laban, men even like Esau, who he is so afraid of. But you're going to prevail over him. Jacob, Israel, he was chosen before birth to be the leader of the family and the people of God, where the older will serve the younger. And the Targums even understand it that way. He says, "What is thy name?" He answered, "Jacob." And he said, "Thy name shall be no more called Jacob but Israel, because thou art magnified with the angels of the Lord and with the mighty, and thou hast prevailed with them." That's first century Jewish thinking. This is the moment that Jacob gets lifted up, and God, he's reassured him. God is reassuring him of his love, of his presence in his life. God's no longer just a story for him anymore of that his parents, his grandparents would talk about. Now Jacob knows his God. And that's why he doesn't really get or doesn't really even need the answer to that question. And then Jacob asked and said, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "What's this? You're asking my name?" And he blessed him there. It's like, don't you know who you're talking to? You know exactly who you're talking to. And so Jacob named the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life has been spared. Yeah, he does know. I don't need to tell you who I am, because you already know. He is the God of Abraham and of Isaac, and now I'm your God. And knowing this truth, knowing that it's not just God is not just some abstract idea out there for other people. Now that you know that you have that relationship, that walk with him yourself, knowing his identity in Adonai, knowing my identity in Adonai, knowing your identity in Messiah, gives Jacob courage for whatever is coming his way. Chapter 33 puts it like this: Then Jacob glanced up and saw, behold, there was Esau coming, and 400 men with him. And so he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children first, then Leah and her children behind them, then Rachel and Joseph behind them. And the way that that we have told this story, the way it was always heard for me growing up, it's as if he puts all of them in front, and Jacob is he's still so afraid, and he's putting them in front when he hides in the back. But the actual opposite is true. When you actually spend the time and read it, and not just trust what somebody else tells you it says. Because verse 3 comes along and says, "But he himself passed on ahead of them," them being the rest of his family, "and he bowed to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother." Now Jacob's not hiding in the background, he's in the lead. Because he already knows that whatever Esau's intentions, Esau is not going to be able to overcome him. Jacob is going to be victorious. His seed, his children, are going to have to grow into a mighty nation. There are promises that God has made that he will keep. That that's coming at him in this moment, it's not going to destroy or prevent those promises from being kept and being fulfilled. Esau won't be able to wipe them out. Esau won't be victorious over Israel. And everyone who has the spirit of Esau, everyone who is influenced by that in this world, even within the body of Messiah in the world today, everybody who harbors bitterness, malice, hatred, that has this desire to speak against or supports anyone over Israel, supports her enemies, needs to know this same thing: you will not prevail. Even if they inflict great harm or injury in a moment, they will not be victorious over Israel, because God's promises still stands. And to make sure that Jacob didn't forget it or think that things reverted back, in case the world out there is uncertain in God's opinion, God repeats it. After this encounter with Esau, when they depart from each other, God repeats his promise as a second witness. In chapter 35, God appeared to Jacob again after he returned from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. And God said to him, "Your name was Jacob." Don't forget, it was Jacob. "No longer will your name be Jacob, for your name will be Israel," Prince of God. And so he named him Israel. And just again, as Israel is a prince of God, other princes, other leaders, other rulers or kings will come from him to lead this great nation that has been promised. Verse 9 says, God also said to him, "I am El Shaddai. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and an assembly of nations will come from you. For from your loins will come forth kings. The land that I gave to Abraham and to Isaac, I will give it to you, and to your seed after you I will give the land." And then God went up from him at the place where he had spoken with him. And it's not just kings, but the king will come from Jacob. The Targums reinforce that idea, along with the ministry of the Memra. In the Aramaic translation, he says, "The Lord revealed himself to Jacob again on his return from Padan Aram, and the Lord blessed him by the name of his word, by the name of his Memra, after the death of his mother. And the Lord said to him, Heretofore was thy name Jacob, thy name shall be no more called Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name." Again, can't quite see the bottom, sorry about that. But again, this is the thinking of the century before and during the lifetime of Yeshua and the century after Yeshua. Verse 11 goes on and says, "And the Lord said to him, I am El Shaddai, spread forth and multiply. A holy people and a congregation of prophets and priests shall be from thy sons whom thou hast begotten, and 2 kings shall yet from thee go forth." Anyone want to take a guess who the first king is? First king would be David. But there's another king that has yet to sit on the throne in power and glory, and that is the Messiah. And the Targums reveal even more about that. It reveals and knows even where, here in the Torah, here in Genesis, the Aramaic reveals that where this king is going to be born. It's revealed at the death of Rachel. This is the Aramaic, it says, "And Rachel died and was buried in the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. And Jacob erected a pillar over the house of burying, which is the pillar of the tomb of Rachel to this day." It goes on. This is the Aramaic. I didn't put that up there. But it says, "And Jacob proceeded and spread his tent beyond the tower of Adair," which is, many people will talk about and refer to as the tower of the flock. "The place from whence it is to be the King Mashiach will be revealed at the end of days." Isn't that interesting? Just as, when those magi arrive in Matthew chapter 2, just as, the ruling Kohanim and Torah scholars are consulted about where Messiah is going to be born when they arrive, they know. In Bethlehem Ephrathah is what they say. So the Torah, in that first century understanding, revealed where he was born, right? When he had called together all the ruling Kohanim and Torah scholars, he began to inquire of them where Messiah was to be born. So they told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." And this ruler, this prince, this king, this shepherd is not just an ordinary person. because that's quoting out of Micah. And when you read that, there it doesn't quite finish the verse. It says, "For from you will come out to me one to be ruler in Israel, one whose goings forth are from of old and from the days of eternity." That's not just a guy. That's the member. That's the Word made flesh. And while much of the world is out there celebrating the coming of Messiah this time of year, knowing this coming is a promise that has long been hoped for, we know his name. We know his name and we love him. Even if we don't see him now, we can still be filled with a joy that is glorious beyond words, that First Peter says. And even in the celebration of that promise, we know that all the adversaries of Israel, the spirit of Esau that's on the move as we see it going on in this moment today, all these things that are coming even against us in our own lives, we need to know, just as Jacob was given courage to face down those adversaries and trust that he will prevail, all those that come against him, he has courage because of his encounter with God. And so too must we. Each of us must draw courage, our courage from our encounter with God, our encounter with Messiah, King Mashiach, born in Bethlehem. We have power with God to overcome the enemy and every obstacle through him. Yeshua even confirms that himself. These things I've spoken to you, that so that in me you may have shalom, you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome. And because he has overcome, we will overcome with him.